Hey, Laurie, thanks for being on the show.
Nice to be here. I'm glad to talk to you.
So we have some overlap, at least a little bit, because we both have marketing strategy and business strategy and consulting as work that we do. A lot of people go, why would you have something like that on the show if they do similar things to you? And I'm like, I love that. That's the best thing for me, because those are the people that we learn from the most, is people who are at least somewhat aligned. There's a lot of nuances, things that you do that I don't do, but I think that's exciting. So I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm excited too. It is the best way to learn, is to learn with each other. To me, it's masterminding all put together in one. It's perfect.
Absolutely. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial story? Everybody's is a little different. Mine started really young. Some people go through the corporate world and then they become an entrepreneur. Everybody's got a different version. So what has that looked like for you? What led you to kind of running your own business, or businesses in your case? What's that looked like over time?
Well, I think it started actually probably in my early 20s. I would always have some kind of side hustle going on. I always had something on the side. My husband was the main breadwinner, and so I was kind of the one trying to find the extra income but still be available for the kids. And so I've always had something going on. I think I started my own photography business and did some direct sales. And that's kind of what started down that road for me, because I just enjoyed being my own person. I enjoyed making my own decisions. So that's kind of what started it. Then I went back into the corporate world for about 8 years and decided that was kind of like the cinch pin, right? I mean, that was what said, no, I don't want to do this anymore. Worked for a couple of different people, worked for one person in particular. And I was basically, as I was working for her, I was really told, I was asked the question is, why are you doing this on your own? Why are you working for somebody else? And that, of course, brings back that, they plant that little seed and it brings it back to, why am I not? So early 40s is when I started my agencies again. And, got those rolling, and it's always been part of who I am, I think. But of course, you have to have somebody give you that little kick once in a while, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So talk a little bit about, I always think it's interesting, kind of the larger company corporate route where you're working for somebody else and then running your own show. Those are different things. Neither one's good or bad, by the way. I always tell people, just because we talk a lot about entrepreneurship, every entrepreneur who starts a business at some point needs a team in order to scale. Mm-hmm. So there have to be team members as well as entrepreneurs. Yep. Everybody is not inherently an entrepreneur. And that's okay. There's nothing right or wrong with one or the other, but I'm curious for you, what were some of those differences that kind of led you to go, you know what, I need to be kind of running my own ship and not on somebody else's ship?
I think there were a couple of things that really came up when I went back into the work world after having been my own person for so many years. When I went back into the work world, the big catalyst for me was my family. When, having been able to do things on the side, work on the side, and then having to all of a sudden answer to somebody else's schedule, somebody else's needs, somebody else's time. I wasn't as available for my family, for my kids, as I wanted to be. My husband traveled a lot for work. So there were a lot of different catalysts that really brought me into it. I think the biggest one, though, was knowing that there was going to be a limit on what I could do. And when I say what I could do, I'm not just talking about freedom or independence or money. It was kind of all of that. And I couldn't make my own desires happen. I couldn't make my own thing happen. And that was kind of the biggest thing for me, is I had an idea of what I wanted to do, what I wanted to work on, what really got me excited to be involved with. And when you're working for somebody else, you don't have that ability to do that all the time. Sometimes you have to follow their rules, their line of, they're the ones setting the vision, which is still good. And for a time, working for somebody else was probably the best thing I could have ever done for myself.
Yeah. What's interesting about that to me is I think a lot of people start their own business because they want to make more money. A lot of
Right.
people start their business because they want more freedom. And a lot of people will start their own business because they want to do things that they actually feel passionate about, that's going to create impact for other people's lives, and also make them feel like at the end of the day, I added some value to the world. I think
Right.
those are kind of the three primary reasons. And part of that, yours kind of really was kind of focused more on the freedom and kind of being focused on the things that you want to be focused on, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But what a lot of people struggle with is they think by starting their own business, they're going to create more freedom. But a lot of people actually do the opposite. And all they really have is a really bad job with a bad boss, which is themselves. And they are often underpaying themselves as a result and overworking themselves. So what have you seen both in your own life and other entrepreneurs that has helped kind of overcome that reality of overworking for not much result? I see a lot of people do that.
Yeah, I did that for a lot of years. Actually, I would say for the first 6-7 years of my business, if I did anything under 60 hours a week, it was amazing. I don't know, a while back out on Facebook, a couple of years ago, there was a thing that came out that said, entrepreneurs are the only people who work 80 hours so that they don't have to work 40 hours for somebody else. I thought that was kind of funny. I'm like, it's a real true statement. So I did that for many, many years. And then actually for me, it actually took a tragedy and a health crisis that made me realize, wait a minute, somewhere along the line, I lost sight of why I started this. I lost sight of what I was wanting to accomplish, the purpose behind the business. In our case, our biggest purpose is helping physicians grow their practices and help them help their patients. So that was one of the biggest things. But in doing all of the work, and what they say, working in the business instead of on the business, what I found myself doing was putting in a lot of extra hours, a lot of extra time, and not really seeing a difference in my own life. Even though I could see it in my client's life, and I felt like we were fulfilling a really good purpose, I wasn't seeing it in my own. And then we had a family tragedy hit. And then shortly after that, I got very, very ill. And I came out of those two things with kind of a new lease on life, I guess you could say. It took me a long time to come out of those. But once I came out on the other side, it really was a moment of, I lost sight of what I needed to do. My work-family life balance was completely out of whack. I kind of think that's a myth anyway, but it was completely gone. And for me, it was coming out of that and saying, I just really have to put some very strong boundaries in place. I think if you go into business and if you don't have those boundaries in place, I was that person that could let people call at any time of day or night. My clients had my cell number. They could call me if they wanted to call me at 11 o'clock at night, 6 a.m. And trust me, they did. Because like you, we have clients all over the United States. Time zones really don't count. So yeah, for me, it was putting boundaries in place and really, really finding out what those boundaries should be, because boundaries look different for everybody. So everybody has to understand their own boundaries. But yeah, putting those boundaries in place was the biggest part of that helped me get things back into balance and back into control.
That's such a big deal. And I think I know most people have struggled with that along the way. And I also think that the reality is with entrepreneurship, especially when you're starting something out, sometimes you are just trying to completely over deliver. I used to answer, client emails and phone calls at 11 o'clock at night or, Sunday afternoon or whatever else, when I really didn't want to be working, because I just wanted to do everything I could possibly do to scale and grow the company. So there is some of that almost has to happen, I think, sometimes in the early years. But finding the place to create those boundaries, I always tell people, they'll say things like, well, this client's, texted me at 11 o'clock at night. And I'm like, well, did you reply? And they're like, well, yeah. Okay, well, as soon as you replied, whatever you allow, you encourage. So,
right.
So by replying at 11:15 at night, you're saying, hey, I'm available and I will respond to your question. Mm-hmm. Now, the next night when they text you at 11 o'clock at night and you don't reply, they're like, hey man, why didn't you reply to my text?
Right.
I'm like, I don't know why you're surprised by that. You allowed that behavior.
Right.
And so
exactly.
We have to set those boundaries. And for some businesses, maybe you need to be able to take calls at certain times. Fine. You know, maybe in your particular season of life right now, whoever's listening, maybe that's where you are, and that's okay. But I had a guy on a podcast one time. It was really sad, actually. He said he used to sleep with his cell phone on his pillow because
Sorry,
they had clients. I know, it's horrible. And they had clients in Japan, other side of the world, and they needed to be able to reach him at any time. And so phone would ring at 1 o'clock in the morning, wake up and kind of get some oxygen and answer the phone. And he ended up really creating some problems for himself in life, which was really candid about on a previous episode. So I think those boundaries, knowing what those are, both for your business and other relationships around you, are, I mean, I just can't, we don't talk about that much on the show, but that is such a huge deal.
Yeah. Yeah. Really. And asking your team to create their boundaries. Cause I was also that boss that would call you at 10 o'clock at night. Right.
Yeah.
And now our team knows very much so that if I'm reaching out to them after business hours, it truly is something critical. It's not, I just had a thought that I needed to share with somebody, right? But I used to do that. I mean, well, we called them brain farts. I'm like, okay, in the middle of the night, I had a brain fart. Used to call people, right? Text people, send an email, middle of the night. Now we don't do that. It's, you know, just not only establishing your own boundaries, but helping your team establish boundaries for themselves and then expecting them to hold them. That's also a really tough thing to do.
And ultimately, you know, as leaders, especially leaders of teams, that is our responsibility. Like it's to know ourselves well enough, first know boundaries we need, and then know our teams well enough to know what boundaries they need. I'm the same way. As a matter of fact, I've gotten to the point now where I try not to, even if I like find a Saturday where it's like a good time for me to work, I'm not opposed to that. If it's, you know, if the kids are off at friends' houses and my wife's working on school planning for the next week, I might as well get a little work done. That's fine. But I'll often think if I email one of my team members on a Saturday afternoon, they're seeing, here comes an email from my boss, and so I need to reply to it. Even though I'm thinking in my head, I don't need to know that right now. That's why I send in an email. I can know whenever. So I'll actually use a delayed send now sometimes. I've gotten that extreme because I don't want them to feel like, even though I've communicated it, that they need to reply to me unless it truly is something urgent, which is rare, thankfully. So I love that idea of boundaries. Let's talk a little bit about one of the things you said, and we don't have to dig into it too personally, obviously, but you talked about having tragedy in life and there kind of being a transition and kind of making decisions off of that. I find a lot of people in business, especially as we mature in business, things happen along the way that we realize, wow, okay, I kind of reset what's most important. So as you have matured in business and gone, hey, these are the things that are most important, what does that look like for you as far as knowing where your time needs to be focused?
Yeah. So our tragedy was our oldest son died. And it's just one of those things that, you know, it shakes your world to the core. So for us, that was, in fact, I even got the news. I was on a client phone call when the news came in. So it was something else. So, but that's what reset things in motion for me. After he passed away, I was pretty much out of it for about 6 months. I honestly, I don't have a memory of those next 6 months. I remember like 3 months in thinking, we just went through Thanksgiving. And it was a fog, a complete fog. And what reset it for me was shortly after the holidays, somebody came to me and they said, we'd like you to join this mastermind group. And I said, knowing I was already in kind of a bad place, and you go into a mastermind thinking you need to contribute and all of this. And they said, no, they said, we really just want you to join this mastermind. Your business qualifies, you guys qualify. And it was a mastermind group that took my husband, because my husband was there at the time, he was working in the business with me, had just started working in the business right before our son had passed away. So it was both of us. It wasn't just one of us. It was both of our livelihoods, our income. It was everything. And they said, we'd like you to come. So we flew out to California in February. And that year we went out to California 4 different times, and we were in 3-day masterminds each time. Plus I was on a weekly phone call with them. And that kind of helped reset my priorities. In fact, I was at one of the mastermind groups when I had somebody come to me and say, they knew our story, they knew what had happened, and they just came to me and they said, can we talk to you for just a minute? And it was actually people leading the mastermind group. And I said, sure. And the gal just said, she goes, I got to tell you that you have to make some changes. Your life depends on it right now. And it was, because my health was declining. My husband's health was declining. So we made some significant investments out of our lives personally, not out of the business, but personally, to go into these mastermind groups. Obviously, flying to California, staying there for 4 or 5 days, investing in the mastermind class itself, and investing in the mastermind meetings. Those things were the catalyst for helping me see just where I had lost focus. They helped us build out a focus guide, our mission statement and vision. They helped us establish our core values. They helped me in doing all of that work. And it was a lot of work. I would say I probably did about 40 hours a month of just working on the business from a leadership position, not even business processes or any of that, just a leadership position. What did I want the business to be? And I spent that next year doing a lot of that. I was fortunate enough to find somebody who I could hire. So hiring the right people, right? So I actually hired somebody who could take over and run the business for me. So that was a big part of it. But those were the things that were really, it changed the way I thought about my business. Up until then, it was, I really believed that the harder you work, the faster you'd get ahead, the more you'd get. That was the philosophy. And, that saying, work smarter, not harder, is a true thing. But I think we lose track of that when we're running our own businesses.
Wow, that's a lot. I just couldn't imagine that level of tragedy. I have 5 kids. My oldest is 15 and my youngest is 7. And man, I just couldn't imagine.
Yeah. My son was 28.
Oh man, the reality of what that, and I think this is really important to think about, because I think that there's this idea that it's not personal, it's business. People say it all the time. I hate that. It's ridiculous.
It's always personal.
It's always personal. Everything's personal. Because we're people, like we're human beings and with other human beings. And just because somebody walks in the door of a business doesn't mean that everything else they left behind that morning goes away. Their mom that's sick, or, their marriage is falling apart, or their dog just died, or, or they lost a child. Like that doesn't go away. It doesn't go away for us as leaders. It doesn't go away for the team members. But as leaders, the hard part in all of that is, to some extent, the organization tends to rely on its leadership. Like where leadership goes, so goes the organization. Yep. And so getting through that is key. I'd love to talk more about those mastermind ideas. And that's not what we're really focused on, but I think it's, I've had some similar coaching opportunities for myself personally. I used to always think that things like mission and vision and values were like things that like corporations did. That wasn't for like entrepreneurs. That's just things people write on walls, because I think a lot of people have those and they don't really abide by them. They're not really even who they are. Right. So I'd love to hear from you some of those things that helped kind of reframe life for you and kind of put you back in the place where you go, okay, these are things I can do, and I'm going to invest in myself, and then I'm going to invest in my company and my team. What were some of the like big wins out of that? Like what were the things that you learned that you thought, wow, this is transformational?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is we had to complete an exercise, and you had to do it both from a personal standpoint and a business standpoint. So you couldn't just focus on one aspect. You had to hit all of it. And you had to create a document, and it had 3 columns. The first column is what I have to do, no one else can do. Second column is what I like to do. And then the third column was what I don't like to do. And you had to fill those out. And we did a time tracking, literally had to track our time for an entire week. That's tough, by the way. That is a hard thing to do. But I did it. I tracked my time for an entire week, where I spent my time, both in business and personal. And like I said, you did that with all three of them. And then when you got done tracking your time and filling out those columns, then you started another worksheet, and it was what I have to do that no one else can do, what I need to delegate, and what comes off my plate completely, right? Not delegate out, but what is unnecessary. Mm-hmm. And so you took the first lists that you created and you filled in the next list. And I will tell you what, it was one of the most eye-opening things for me on a personal level. I learned that I'd always been one of those people where my dishes had to be done. I couldn't go to bed if my dishes weren't done. I was really crazy about the way my house was done. Everything had to be perfect all the time. Mm-hmm. And it was like, wait a minute, does it really? When we lost our son, it was like, I stopped and I thought, like, okay, when he was growing up, was that what my focus was? Is that where it should have been? It really made me, when you go through something like that, it makes you rethink your entire self. Mm. A friend of mine told me that there's very few things that will change you at the core of who you are, but losing a spouse, a child, something like that, those things will change you at your core. And I really, as I went through those worksheets, and I really did the work, and yes, it was paper, not electronic, but as I really did the work, I had to evaluate, what is this really that important? Mm-hmm. Who cares if there's a couple dishes in my sink when I go to bed? My kitchen's still clean. I have a plate and a cup in the sink. So what, right? It doesn't matter. Do I have to be crazy? Does my bed have to be made within 20 minutes of getting up every morning? Guess what? No, it doesn't. Does the laundry have to always be caught up? No, it doesn't. So really evaluating on a personal life where I was spending my time, what I had to spend time with, what was important. At that point, it became all about my granddaughter. So my son left me a beautiful granddaughter and daughter-in-law, and so that became the most important thing to me, is how do I spend time with them? And then my other kids, how do I spend more time with them? How am I involved in their lives? So on the personal level, walking through that exercise, and then on the business level, it was just completely eye-opening for me, because it showed me that I had gotten so involved in the nitty-gritty of the business and so involved in the details that I was missing the big picture. But I wasn't being a leader. I wasn't. I was so in the trenches that I wasn't leading anything. I was head down, shovel in hand, just driving through the muck. Well, you can't lead when that's the case. You've got to, doesn't mean you can't be somebody who's hands-on, because I still am very hands-on. But it does mean that you have to be able to stand up once in a while and make sure you guys are headed in the right direction, right? Because that's what vision's about. Vision isn't how we get from point A to point B. Vision is knowing where point B is, mm-hmm. and stuff. And then, but you have to be able to lead to do that. So that really helped me. That's why hiring, I'll never forget when I hired, he's now the CEO of the company. And when I hired him, he wasn't. I brought him on as manager of sales and finance, I believe. And when I hired him, I did so with the idea that there were certain things I was going to get off my plate. Finance and sales, while it's critical for business, you have to know your numbers. It's just not something I like to do. So that was one of those things I had to get off. Plus, it was one of the most time-consuming aspects. It was taking up so much of my time. I wasn't able to be where I needed to be in other areas of the company. So getting him involved. So that was that key shift for me in the business, in the mastermind group, was realizing that I had to have better people in place to run the company so that I could lead. you can't always lead and run the company at the same time. That's pretty tough.
Wow. Yes. All of that. It's just, I think when I can hear the depth of wisdom and experience that you have walked through, it is sobering and encouraging all at the same time, because it's so easy, I think, for entrepreneurs to get caught in the weeds and get caught in doing all the things and believe what people say sometimes, which is also not true. If you want something done right, you got to do it yourself.
Definitely not true.
And at the end of the day, I used to believe that so wholeheartedly. And it was just my pure, raw arrogance in the midst of all of that. And now, it took me 20 years to figure out how to get this stuff together so that I wasn't the one who was putting the pixels on the screen or writing the words that show up in copy or whatever else, because I just always felt like I had to get in there and do it. And what I didn't realize along the way was by stepping away from it, I'm actually creating opportunity for other people. Right. And I think so many leaders think that their responsibility is to prevent failure in the organization. I actually think that my job is to create a place where other people have the opportunity to fail, just not fail catastrophically. Because how did I learn along the way so many times? It was from like, okay, that didn't work. Let's try something else,
Right.
And so I just love all that insight into it. Let's talk about hiring a little bit, because that's something that actually I'm doing 4 interviews today that are kind of final interviews for a new position here. And the team interviews people, then gets interviewed again, and then I interview them at the end. Yep. And hiring is a thing a lot of people really struggle with. Team building is a thing a lot of people really struggle with, because a lot of entrepreneurs start by themselves. So let's talk about hiring. What are some things that you've learned along the way that have added the most value to getting hiring right, so you're hiring the right person for the right seat?
Well, I was once given the advice, hire slow, fire fast. And we've all heard that in different ways. I think that is probably one of the biggest things that we really, really work hard. It can take 3 to 6 months for us to hire somebody. We do not move through the process quickly. It's very thorough. We actually just started working with a consulting agency who vets our new employees before we even see them. They go through an entire vetting and interview process. And then, of course, they go through the team interviews, and then upper management interviews. And then eventually myself and the CEO are involved. But we have a process that is that. And we include everything you can imagine from hiring. It has to be, obviously now it's video conferencing and phone conferencing. But even before COVID and all of this, we were doing phone conferences, and we would bring them in for an interview, and multiple different types of interview. And we would have people actually drop out of the process because they didn't like how long it was taking us, or they didn't like spending the time. And I'm like, well, if you don't like going through the process of being hired, you're definitely not going to like going through our processes internally. I mean, that's just not going to happen. So that's always been a fun thing to see, because it's like, well, they saved me some time, so I'm good with that. So that hiring the right people, though, is, for me, I can teach skill set. I can teach somebody how to write copy. I can teach somebody how to use our processes and our systems and all of that. But I can't teach them work ethic. I can't teach them kindness. I can't. So we really go after what we consider our core values, our culture, to see if that is a part of who their personality is. And then, of course, depending on the position, what characteristics a successful person in that position is going to have. We just hired a new executive administrator, and she's phenomenal. One of the things we wanted is I wanted somebody who was willing to push me. Not too many people are comfortable pushing me, quite frankly, but she does so very respectfully, and she's been great at it. And so Hiring the right people from the get-go, I think is critical, but I think there's a second half of that. And that is sometimes you may not have hired the right person, but you still have the opportunity to make them successful. Mm-hmm. What does that look like? Sometimes there's just you've tried everything and that's it. It's not going to work. But then there are other times where you do have the ability to make somebody successful, and patience is a big part of it, right?
Yeah, I think that's great. I love the idea of taking way too long to hire people. I mean, I think because the fact is, if you hire the wrong person, especially if there's major issues that you just didn't take the time to figure out, which I have done that before.
Me too.
It takes a lot longer, and it costs a lot more money to then let that person go and have to hire somebody else. Like, you might as well have just done it right in the first place. It is really one of those scenarios. I'm a very ready, aim, fire kind of person. Like I move really fast, but in that is the one area where I go, okay, hold on, we got to slow down a little bit and figure that out. So one thing I'm curious about is, you mentioned hiring a CEO. That's something I've never done. That is my job right now. But I could see at some point in the future, having other companies. And as a result, if I have other companies, I might need somebody to run this. I mean, there's plenty of business leaders like that who have to bring in leaders to run their organization. So what has that transition been like? And then what is your role now? So if you're not CEO, what is your capacity within the company? What does the team expect from you? Ultimately, kind of what is your job day to day, since you have somebody else who is kind of taking the role that might traditionally be yours?
Well, it's kind of funny you bring that up, because I actually just sold the companies.
Well, there you go.
I am still, though, heavily involved. I am the chief marketing officer. I took a step down. I sold the company. So the guy that I hired, his name is Tyler Cady, and I hired him for sales and finance. And he worked for me for 3 weeks, and he came to me and he said, one day I'm going to buy this company from you. At the time, I remember thinking, who are you?
Right.
But he doubled our sales in a year.
Wow.
Yeah. And along with that, he's been intricate in operations. And so he eventually moved up to director of finance, and then he moved from that to COO, and now he is the owner and CEO. I am the chief marketing officer and founder, and I'm obviously still on the board. But so that has changed. And one of the reasons that shift happened is exactly what you just said, which is that natural progression of, let's start something else. So that's one of the things that we're actually in the process, and he and I are going into it together, is we are starting a training company. So it's just a new venture. For me, it was just the timing was correct. My husband will be retiring in 5 years, and I want other revenue streams coming in, other businesses supporting us for life, right? That's the idea, for life. And so I just needed to make the change, and the timing was the right timing. Where other people were struggling businesses were struggling because of COVID. COVID actually kind of woke me up again, another one of those little moments where you kind of go, aha. Right. And I saw an opportunity that I hadn't seen before. And so that was kind of the catalyst. But yeah, I just sold the companies. So
wow, well, congratulations. That's a big deal.
It is a big deal. It is a big deal.
It's interesting when you mentioned the whole COVID reality and how you kind of woke you up and you saw opportunities. What I love about that is like what entrepreneurship is to me, right? It's looking at a space where other people see nothing but ashes, and you go, I got an idea. And then you do something about it. Like, I think that's the biggest mistake a lot of people make, is they go, oh, well, I had that idea that somebody else executes on. And you're like, yeah, but you didn't do anything with it. So what's the point? My father-in-law is from England originally, and he's always loved America. So he moved here earlier in life. My wife was born in England, and she moved here when she was 13. And he kind of had that American dream. He sold everything they had in England and moved to America. And it was interesting because I had a conversation with him the other day. And he said, he's like, you know what I love about this country is he's like, in the midst of all this craziness right now, he's like, I see so many, like, he's like, I can just see so many like little sprouts, you know, popping up out of the burnt down forest.
Yep.
And he's like, and that's America. He's like, that's who you are as a country. And I'm like, oh, I hope that's true. Like, Lord, let that be true. I believe that's true. But like when you say things like that, I go, yeah, that's it. It's looking out and going, what can we do here? How can we help? You know, what can happen? And I love this quote. One of my kind of aspirational identities is a guy named Michael Hyatt. And
I know Michael Hyatt. Yes.
Do you? So I love him. And
I've read his.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that he says all the time is to ask the question, what does this make possible in all things? And in the midst of something like this COVID thing, you look around and you ask that question, like, what does this make possible? Yeah. And you might be surprised what answers you find.
Yeah. I think we're going to see a whole different level of businesses come out of this. Some people will be doing businesses out of necessity, but some people will have those aha moments where they saw an opportunity to do something different. And I think it's exciting. I know I've talked with a number of business leaders lately, and they're all pivoting, is what they call it, is pivoting, which it's an overused term right now, but they're all starting something new. They're all looking at it and going, and you can always tell the people who've been in business for a while because they know that's what has to happen. I mean, you hit recessions, you hit all sorts of things happen, right? So you know you have to change with the times as quickly as possible. And I think that's something that, as I'm talking with different business leaders and stuff, I'm hearing all the time. And I think it's going to be great when we come out of this. I think our world's going to look different, definitely different. But I think I think we have the opportunity to make it a better one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of people can hear things like that and think, oh, well, we're talking about opportunities in the midst of great tragedy and all, you know, there's a lot of people that are struggling, which is true. But both of those things can be true at the same time. It can be true that some people are having a really hard time. It can also be true that, like, wow, there's so much opportunity. And by opportunity, it's not, I think people hear that sometimes in entrepreneurial and they think it just means about making money. And it's not. It is like, wow, there's so much opportunity to help other people. That really is what good businesses do.
Right. We're not talking about being opportunistic.
Right. That's very different.
Very, very different. We don't want to be opportunistic. If we do that, then we're horrible people.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about just the opportunity to build something out of the ashes. Because if we build something that lasts, if we can build something that will work, then we're only making things better. We're not making things worse.
Yeah. And one of the things that we're doing right now that's a big kind of, it's not a pivot, it's just an addition to what we're already doing is, you know, I'm really passionate about small business owners. I'm really passionate about helping people figure out what to do next and how to get those things right. And I think for so long I've taken for granted all the things that I've learned over 20 years. I just assume everybody knows all these things, and they don't, because I didn't know them 10 years ago. Why should anybody else? Right. And so now we're kind of building on what I'm essentially saying is we have an agency now, and we're kind of building a consultancy onto it. There's some connecting gaps between the two that tie them together. But it's going to allow us to care for people and serve people and help people that we might not be able to on the agency side. The agency is too expensive for a lot of small businesses, but there could be a lot of opportunity on coaching, training, teaching, consulting that we can really have big impact. And I'm really excited about that. And that's exactly what you're saying. Like there's so much chance to help people now. And I think that's a good thing in the midst of it all.
Yeah, definitely. And the training aspect is something that really has always given me, I love that aspect of business is training. And so giving people the opportunity to train their teams in a way that they haven't ever thought about before, that we have found as an agency is extremely effective. But in addition, helping people, the small business owners who they're so busy just trying to run their business. How do you train somebody and work your business at the same time? It's very difficult. So we're excited about it.
That's awesome. That's really exciting. I love that stuff. I think it's such a huge place that people need help right now. And
Yeah.
I told somebody the other day, I was like, we're in the midst of a time where culturally we have more access to knowledge than we've ever had in the history of humanity, right? We can look up how to do absolutely anything and there'll be a YouTube video on it. The problem is we don't always know who to trust. The problem is we don't always know where to start. We don't always know what the next step should be, and that can be completely overwhelming. And I think having the right teachers, coaches, and trainers, the education market, I think, is going to look very different over the next 10 to 20 years than it ever has before. And there's great opportunity for that now.
I agree.
Oh gosh, I have so many other things that we could chat about, but let's pivot a little bit and talk about this whole idea of work-life balance. I tend to agree with what you said earlier, which is it's a bit of a myth. But I'd love to let you answer two questions. Number one, what does work-life balance actually mean to you? I only use that term because that's what people know it by. And number two, how has that changed, which we talked a little bit about, but how has that changed over different seasons of life and business?
So I do believe work-life balance is a myth, the way people use it currently, right? I don't believe you can have work-life balance happening at the same time, right? When you go to work, you're at work. You're there 8 hours a day. You're focused on what you're doing there that day. You go home, you might be home for 8 hours, hopefully, or maybe 6, 4 if you're some people. But you don't get to just go home and turn everything from work off. Even if you work for somebody, it just doesn't happen that way, right? If you had a good day, you're still talking about it. You had a bad day. Oh my gosh, it could linger the whole night, right? I mean, it can just build on. So I don't believe that work-life balance happens at the same time. I believe that when you are in a certain season of life where work is very, you're building your career, you're building a business, regardless, I think that becomes very much the focus. And then life kind of takes a back seat. You do it on weekends, you do it when you have spare time. So work life isn't really in balance at that point. But then I think there's going to be a season or seasons in every person's life where they go, wait a minute, I've been working too hard. I'm burned out. I need time. And then all of a sudden they're going to shift their focus and they're going to go straight to living life. They're going to take time off, whatever that looks like. They may change jobs. They may change careers. They're going to do something at some point that's going to make them go, I need more balance again. I need more priority back in my personal life. And so I believe you either are working hard or you're living hard. One of the two. I don't think you can do both well at the same time. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't take time in between. When we finally figured it out, when everything kind of came to a head and my husband and I figured out that our priorities had to shift, we started taking vacations where there was no internet. That was the big thing. It's like, I want to go somewhere where there's no cell service and no internet. And it really is probably the best thing we've ever done. But I did that very intentionally, because whether it was a week or sometimes it was 10 days, you need that time to completely unplug. And I think that that's a critical part for everybody in life and work. So there you go.
Yeah, I think that's great, especially the advice at the end about finding a place to be literally completely unplugged, especially in our digital world today. We've created all these devices as a culture to help us be more productive, but we've also created a lot of insanity for ourselves. And I think a lot of people may be listening and think, well, I can't take 7 days away and not be able to connect to the business. And you might not be in a place there yet, and that's okay, but you can move towards it. Because I remember spending years where I never took a real vacation. And by real vacation, I mean, I'm not working at all. I'm not calling the office. I'm not checking in. I'm not doing any of that. And 2 months ago, we did a 30-day family RV trip. The first 2 weeks, I worked not at all, not 1 ounce of anything. And the second 2 weeks, I just checked in on a few things, but honestly, I didn't really even need to do that. But that hasn't come overnight. It's taken me 21 years to figure that out. I'm a slow learner, And but I realized the excuse I would always make is, yeah, but I love work. I love what I do. I like these things, and there's nothing wrong with that. But at some point, I realized, well, hold on, now I'm married. Well, hold on, now I have a child. Well, now I got 3 children. Now I have 5 children. And
The question isn't, do you love your work? The question is, does your family love your work?
that's right. That's right. And sometimes they're happy for me to go to work. But I think, what I always tell people as they're kind of in that hustle mode of entrepreneurship is, you can always make more money. There's plenty of people who have gone completely bankrupt, and a few years later, they're millionaires. Like that
Right.
happens.
Yep.
And but no matter how much money you have, if you use your time up, you don't get it back, and you can't buy it back. There's no buyback plan on lost time. And so I always tell people, like, if you can't take that time off now, figure out how you do an afternoon. Then figure out how you do a day. Then ask that question. I ask, like, what has to be true? The other thing you ask is, what needs to be true today in order for that to be true tomorrow? That's a great question.
Yeah.
Because it's like, what do I need to change right now so that in the future I can do these things over here? Laurie, this has been such a challenging, encouraging conversation for me to think through. I'd love to know where people can find you online.
The best place to find me is we have our own podcast show. It's beforehappyhour.com. So it's the letter B, the number 4, happyhour.com. That's probably one of the best places to find me. But LinkedIn is actually a really good one. I pay very close attention to my LinkedIn account. So it's just Laurie Hibma, LORI HIBMA. On LinkedIn. That is probably one of the things I pay closest attention to is my LinkedIn account. So if people want to reach out to me, that's a great place to do. So it's easy too for most people because they can do it right from their phone.
That's great. It's funny. I thought LinkedIn was going to die a few years ago, and now I feel more vibrant than ever. So Microsoft's done a good job with that. So now, just parting advice: when you're speaking to another entrepreneur who's trying to make this thing work, they're trying to build a business that lasts. What parting thoughts would you leave with them today?
Know who you are. Know who you are and why you're doing this. If the only answer is money, you can get a job and make money. It's got to be bigger than money. Money is just a tool. So know who you are and why you're doing this, and keep them in front of you all the time. Don't let a minute go by where you forget that.
I love that. I think that is just an absolute pound of wisdom for people to absorb. You can get money anywhere, but if you're going to run your own business and you're going to do it well over time, you got to know who you are and why you're doing it. Laurie, thanks so much for being on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yes, thank you, Jay.
Hey, I hope this video has helped you with some tips and ideas to build a business that lasts. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on the next videos that we roll out. And more importantly, for some awesome free resources, head over to our website at buildingabusinessthatlasts.com. You can get a free copy of my book there where I tell you how I have built an agency that's grown year over year for the last 20 years in a row. So go grab that, buildingabusinessthatlasts.com, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thanks. We'll see you soon.